What are we going to learn tonight?
We are going to learn how to raise a healthy family, how to keep your kids healthy from day one and throughout life.
Yeah, and so tonight, I've been excited about tonight for a while because our next generation is vitally important. And, it's almost cliche, but I think COVID has highlighted the importance of not only just raising healthy kids, because healthy kids turn into healthy adults, but also with a mindset of resilience, with a mindset of success, and just a mindset of not fearing your body. And so the hope is tonight that as you learn this information, and it wouldn't just be good information, but there'd be action, there'd be implementation, there'd be differences in how you raise your kids and maybe speak to your grandkids, that this would be a generational effect from tonight.
Yes, absolutely. And the fact that you are here in person or online means that you showed up, means that you care. You care about your kids, you care about the future. So in a way of saying thank you for that, we have a gift for you.
That's right.
If you stick around to the end, you will receive access to our MaxKids recipe book. So stick around to the end.
MaxKids recipe book.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All sorts of recipes, good for lunches, for dinners, easy things that you can pack. They're really delicious too.
Yeah, and these are things that we with our kids. These are recipes that we use. Hey, if you've got picky eaters at home or just need something fresh, that'll be right there for the recipe book. We'll get that at the end. Hey, if you are a guest, this is your first time being exposed to the Max Living Indie culture, we'll also give you the opportunity at the end to plug in, really get immersed in this culture of Max Living, become a patient, come in the initial examinations. We'll go through that at the end, so we'll give you that opportunity at the end. Here's the reality right now, is right now we've got a sick generation. Our mission is Max Living, in general. We've got over 200 offices nationwide and now hundreds of doctors nationwide. And the mission is to not just raise healthy families, but to empower people to live their best life. And we need that now more than ever. It's understandably the reason why is because right now we have a sick culture, a sick generation. And we're raising a sick generation. And we believe that with Max Living, we have the answer. And we call the answer the 5 essentials. And what that means, the 5 essentials. So what we've recognized is that there are 5 essentials that create health, longevity, vitality, but also when we do them wrong, there are actually 5 sources of interference that will cause the body to be sick, break down premature, develop disease, and unfortunately cause an early death. So 5 essentials. What are the 5 essentials?
Quick run through of the 5 essentials. First one is core chiropractic. So removing interference from the nervous system. When there's interference in the nervous system, the body can't function at its optimal level. So we remove the interference so the body heals and functions at 100%. Nutrition, mindset, oxygen, and exercise, and then minimizing toxins. Those all together make up the 5 essentials for a healthy life.
Yeah, and so here's the challenge is that we can look at the 5 essentials and we could say, I'm eating really well. I work out, I work out every day. But somebody once said to me, the one essential that you neglect is the one that kills you. And for our kids, the one essential that we just don't pour into our kids are the ones that we don't be intentional about teaching our kids these things. It's the one that they're going to grow up thinking is unnecessary. And so mindset is critically important, and I think it goes without saying, but you can think yourself healthy, you can also think yourself sick. Right now the fear and anxiety, there's just a study that came out that showed in June that 1 out of every 4 young persons thought about or had intentions of committing suicide in June. And so some of the COVID-19, I'd say, side effects of shutting down society, shutting down the schools, social distancing, mask wearing is having a profound effect across the country. But let's think about our kids right now. What does that look like for our kids to grow up in a world where they maybe fear each other, maybe fear every germ, although we're breathing in right now 1,800 different microbes currently right now. And so we fear our environment, so we sanitize. We fear touching or getting close together. What does that look like if we're not intentional about retraining and re-educating our children? And so mindset is critically important. How we feed our bodies, we're going to talk through some just quick tips and maybe tricks. Are there some tricks?
Maybe.
Might be some tricks. And how to get our kids to move, how to make sure that we're not creating a toxic environment for our kids. But think of a plant. If there's a plant right here, I think we've got one behind us, not real though. And so a plant needs just a couple of things. It just needs sun, water, and what? Good soil, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you deprive a plant of any one of those things, what happens to the plant?
Dies.
And so what happens to us when we neglect one of the essentials to life? We die either prematurely or we develop disease over time, which creates chronic sickness. And so setting the stage up for, as we're going through this, maybe it's for you right now, it's like, hey, what's the one thing that I need to do differently today in order to set myself up for success tomorrow? Maybe don't write down 22 things that you need to change tomorrow, because oftentimes that's overwhelming.
Overwhelming, yeah.
Okay.
So with the 5 essentials, a lot of people don't realize that those directly apply to all ages, and especially in kids. Today is MaxKids, so we're focusing on kids. We're talking about chronic diseases that are starting to show up in kids. And studies have shown that 25% of kids now suffer from a chronic illness. 5% of kids suffer from multiple chronic illnesses. So these aren't the things that kind of come and go, the things like colds and flus and vomiting and diarrhea. Those are things that the body typically allows to run its course and gets over pretty well. But these are things that last for months on end, things that require hospitalization or continued medical treatment, diseases that really affect kids' everyday lives.
Yeah. I want to say this, hey, as we're going through this, maybe it's you or somebody and like, hey, my kids are affected by these things. There's no shame, there's no guilt. If it's not like, hey, there's blame and shame and you got to feel that as we're going through this. There's going to be some things that, hey, we haven't, I'm perfect parent? Nope. So there's some things that as we go through this, there's no shame or guilt, but there is the, I think, obligation. Once you know something, I feel like there's a responsibility to share it. And so as we're going through this, maybe you're watching live or after the fact, share this message. It's so easy right now, social media. Share the message, and then if you do have, questions, hey, we've got somebody who is fielding those questions, and she'll even bring them up. So if you've got questions along the way, type your questions, and we've got people live here too. So you guys get first dibs on all the questions. I already told her that. So if you have questions, comments, hey, even just give some encouragement, some amen, some thumbs up. We'd like to go back and we look at that. That really determines if we were doing good or not. If we go back and there's 0 comments, it's like totally a failure. So we're depending on you right now to help our self-esteem.
Yes, great. Okay. So, like you said, the focus isn't necessarily whether or not a problem is there, it's what we do about it. But first we need to talk about the fact that it really is a problem. So with children being our future, they are the future peacekeepers, the future world changers. They're the leaders that are going to bring us forward out of what we're currently in. So we really need to focus on where's the problem and how can we get to the cause of it. So first we need to address the fact that 1 in 6 children have a developmental disorder. Autism rates are now 1 in 54 in the US. It's higher in boys than it is in girls. 1 in 408 kids will be diagnosed with cancer before age 15. So the life expectancy in the U.S. population actually for the 2nd year in a row has declined, and that number has only gone up since they started tracking it.
Which is just ridiculous, because if you think about, we have the best of everything. We have the best medicine, we have the best doctors, we take the most medications. We're 5% of the world's population, we take 75% of the world's drugs. So here we are, the best of the best in everything, yet here we are ranking either dead last and having skyrocketing autism rates. And the reality is we get questions about autism, and people will say, well, it's genetic and it's increased diagnosis. That's what they're saying. Well, let's just debunk the gene theory of disease right now, because the gene theory of disease is a flawed theory. And remember, it is a theory. And the reality is that there's a whole field of study called epigenetics. It's a growing field and interest where people are understanding it's what's above the gene that actually controls the gene. It's what we do throughout the course of a lifetime. And I'll give you an example. Denmark, they keep a very detailed record of their twin studies. And what they found is that when you separate biological twins, so genetically biological twins, you separate them at birth, what they found is that if the person who's raising that child, so the adoptive parent, ends up being diagnosed with a certain type of cancer, that child is now 500% more likely to develop the exact same type of cancer. independent of biomom and independent of the other child, the other twin. And so think about that. It's not about genes, it's about what we do. So your environment, your environment really pulls the trigger. Your genes might load the gun, but the environment is really what pulls the trigger there. So the gene theory, you can see this in a family. You see one person in a family that lives to 90. We all have an Uncle Ed in our family, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Smokes a pack a day, drinks a fifth of whiskey, shows up to the family reunion, sits in the corner, and you can't kill him, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have Aunt Betty who, does everything right, and then ends up getting diagnosed with cancer and dies at 40 or 50 years old. Yeah. And many times these people are in the same family, and we always ask, what's the difference? If it's the reality is what we can do really makes a huge difference in our lives, why is there the Uncle Ed and why is there the Aunt Betty? And the difference is not necessarily how they lived, it's how they were functioning. Yeah. But it's independent of genetics. So Uncle Ed's body was able to function better for whatever reason. Maybe he was more resilient, maybe he didn't have all the things that we're going to talk about growing up as a child. That we now see is setting up kids for really failure when it comes to their health. And so we're going to talk through some of the reasons why somebody is sicker earlier, and now we have diagnoses of childhood cancer, or what they call pediatric cancer now. So why is that? Why is it that now we see special education and buses now for our children? Why is it that we have entire school systems for occupational therapy and occupational health for our kids who are younger and younger? Why is it that you go to the ball diamonds now with my kids and you see every time 1, 2, sometimes 3 kids who are completely bald? You didn't see this growing up. I never saw that growing up. Why is that in every single classroom there's at least 3 that are autistic, and now they're removed and have their own private education? Why is that? And what's unfortunate is that the cries of people of asking the questions of why and causation, what's happening, really is not a deafening cry right now. It's almost like we're slowly okay with our future generation just being completely toxic and unfortunately losing an entire generation. Like, where are the pediatricians right now who are so upset and outraged and questioning what the story is? But what do? We say better diagnosis, and unfortunately it's just genes.
Yeah.
Genes haven't changed in thousands of years. Our genetic code hasn't. It's the expression of our genes that's changed. It's all based off of how we live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the hopelessness that comes when you subscribe to the idea that it is completely genetic. The good news is that less than 5% of health conditions are purely genetic. So that means that there's a lot of it that is totally within our control.
That's right.
So we have to be looking at, if it's not coming from within us, from our genes, what are we putting around us? What are we putting inside of us? And that's where we talk about toxicity. So currently, with toxins in our environment, we have the chemicals that we're exposed to, our food is all sprayed, we have the products that we put on our bodies. Those things build up toxicity in us and in our children. In kids, we also have toxins that are in their toys that are manufactured. So 1 in 3 tested kids' toys contained toxic chemicals, formaldehyde, BPA, phthalates. These things are things that our kids are touching, they're putting in their mouths. And it comes from toys. That's kind of a scary thing to think about, actually, that the things that you're giving your kids are producing more toxicity in their body. But there are safe alternatives, things that are still fun that you can buy for your kids. So here's a tip, a trick. You can buy wooden toys, solid wood toys manufactured in the US or in Canada. If you do buy plastic toys, just make sure that they're BPA free and don't put them out in the sun, because sun exposure will cause the leaching of the chemicals. Yeah. But there are good alternatives for it.
Chrissy looked at Nathan when we brought up toys. Is that...
Well, there's just the pictures of the Legos, and we have like thousands.
Oh no. Yeah. I think it's difficult, because you take your kids to the store and they see everything, and then you come home with a wooden horse. Maybe not like the most attractive thing, but this is a teaching moment, and it doesn't all have to be extremely toxic. Yeah, but it is a teaching moment. We'll talk about autism a little bit. The prevalence, it's going up. So the numbers, when I was in school, it was like 1 in 1,000, and before that, I remember hearing it was 1 in 10,000, and it's just skyrocketing now.
Yeah. Now the stats are 1 in 54, and that's in boys. This graph here shows us where it started. I believe it's back in the
that's graph
40s.
Needs to be updated, but now they're saying if it continues the trend that it's on, it's going to be 1 and 2 by 2025.
Which is 5 years from now. That's insane.
1 in 2. So let that just sink in just for a second. If the trajectory is what it is right now and it continues, and even when it was 1 in 110, I remember being in chiropractic school and they said it's 1 in 110. I was like, finally, people are going to be outraged about this. Nothing. It was crickets. And then when it was 1 in 88, I remember, okay, finally people are going to wake up. I saw 1 in 33 New Jersey boys are now being diagnosed with autism. It's like, when is it going to happen? Is it when 1 every 2 kids? Well, I don't know if we're going to find out.
Yeah.
But we know there's a cause.
Yeah, absolutely. So autism being directly linked to toxicity. This is a study that shows mercury toxicity in the environment and then the rates of autism in Texas. And so there's a direct correlation here showing that the amount of toxicity that's built up in the body, it has a neurological effect. And that's why we're seeing issues with autism and neurological diseases like that.
Yeah, and there are many factors when talking about autism. We don't want to make this sound like it's simple because it's not simple. However, some of the simple things are being neglected. And some of the most easily and readily available data sometimes is purposefully being manipulated or covered up. And now we're seeing with finally the world is being exposed to YouTube censorship. I know this is on YouTube right now. Facebook censorship, Twitter censorship. Like, we're seeing the social media platforms that are censoring information. Guys, this is not new. I remember when Andy Wakefield uncovered a connection between an MMR vaccine and autism that was pulled from the Lancet. It was completely covered up. And now there's been 20 studies that have been, over 20 now, that's been replicating that individual study. And yet, what do you hear about that? And so if you've been told, hey, there's no connection whatsoever between either toxicity or adjuvants or vaccines and autism, you've been lied to. And it's been censored. And it's time to start talking about this and uncover some of that stuff because it's real. Yeah. And you hear about, vaccines save lives, and I'm not here to say they do or don't, but I am here to maybe point out some of the misinformation that maybe you haven't seen before. And one of them is that the idea that vaccines were it was solely the responsibility of the vaccines that eradicated disease. And so you can see on the screen or behind you, this one is, I believe it's measles. Yeah, and what you'll see is that they always show a graph around the 1950s. So you'll see that on the screen that the graph is around 1950s. You see this peak, and then all of a sudden you see a vaccine introduced, and you see it go down. When you actually extrapolate the data and look at the full picture of vaccines, look what it actually shows. This is measles. You see it skyrocket early on in the early 1900s. It's going down, and then you see the vaccine introduced far into the cycle, but you never see that picture, do you? You don't see that on Wikipedia. You're certainly not going to see that in medical education. In our public health classes that we took, they show the first one. They never show the second one. Again, there's a lot of money to be made on vaccines, but there's a lot of, and we're seeing it right now, it's a $60 billion industry. It's about to go from $60 billion to $360 billion with the COVID-19 vaccine that's to come. And what do we have now? The leading vaccine manufacturer right now is Moderna, who's never brought a drug through the FDA all the way to market, and now they're the leaders in right now the current COVID-19 vaccine. And so there are some things that we need to dig into and question. And I don't want to preach to the choir tonight. I want you to question what I'm saying, question what you've heard, question the things that have maybe been commonly said that is the status quo. But it should be looked into. Again, this one is another one, and this one is measles. Oh, here we've got diphtheria. We've got pertussis, and again, different vaccines, same story. And what we always hear is, what about polio? Yeah. What about polio? Polio eradicated disease, correct? Well, if you ever tell a plumber that who knows their history, they get frustrated with you because the vaccine got all the credit for a invention in sanitization and refrigeration, and here they are knowing the history of plumbing and getting our waste, because what is polio? It goes by oral fecal route. What does that mean? That's feces, guys. And so you tell me they cleaned up the water, they started refrigerating everything, and then you started to see it go down. Again, same story with 1950s of showing the eradication, but if you look at the full graph, what do you see? This is a history of DDT as an example, and DDT is a pesticide that was used that has been linked to polio. And you look at the history of DDT, and it's interesting how the symptoms and problems with DDT mimic what you would see with the symptoms of polio. It's not the only story with polio. However, it does mimic it, and when they introduced it, what did you see? All the symptoms, all the diagnosis of polio skyrocket, and when they found out, hey, spraying our kids with DDT is probably not a good idea, and the whole DDT is good for me propaganda, because that's what it turned out to be. What did they find? They found that animals were getting sick. They pulled it from the market, and what did you see? It go down, and when it went down, when was the Salk vaccine introduced? When it was already on its way down, you see a little spike there. That's when the Salk vaccine was actually introduced because it caused the polio. And now what's happened? It's completely, they say, eradicated, right? Or was it? Because now what you have is you have acute flaccid paralysis. You have other names that if right now, and there's several up on the screen, that if you were to look at the symptoms of some of these other diagnoses, what you would get back in the 50s would have been a diagnosis of polio. And now we have over 15 different diagnoses that have been split up and recategorized. And especially, I want to bring to attention the AFP, or acute flaccid paralysis, because now what do you see happening? So polio is out, but this acute flaccid paralysis is skyrocketing. And what they're saying now is just get ready, because at the end of this year, 2020, is you're going to see AFP, or acute flaccid paralysis, in the media. You're going to see more and more people get it. Well, what we know is AFP, or acute flaccid paralysis, is also one of the vaccine reactions. So one of the issues with vaccinations is you see Guillain-Barré, you see commonly issues that would be categorized as AFP. And so what are they preparing you for? The COVID-19 vaccine that's going to come and damage kids, and now they're going to diagnose it as AFP, and now there's a second wave, or a new problem that we have to deal with that right on the heels of COVID-19. So again, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. Our job is to bring it up. Your job is to question it. So feel free to question our information, where we got the information. But if you're questioning our information, I hope you're also questioning the current narrative and the CDC and the World Health Organization. And oh, by the way, the CDC, they do own 56 different patents for vaccines, and so we better be questioning them a lot, since they have financial interest to gain, and we only have things to lose by bringing this up. Every time we talk about this, guess what? We lose people.
Yeah.
Every time I talk about this on the radio, guess what? People call. We got a visit from the health department today. So it is what it is. So we bring this up. We carry all the risk. They bring it up, and they get rewarded. So question it, and question who your health authority really is.
Yeah. So levels of toxicity, multiple different areas, they all affect the immune system. What we're seeing now more and more as far as chronic disease increase in children, these are diseases that never existed in kids before. These were adult diseases, and now we're seeing them in kids as early as birth. A lot of what we're seeing is actually autoimmune disease now. So things like type 1 diabetes, asthma, allergies. Allergies is a huge one. So many kids come in here and they have allergies when it comes to sinus allergies, or even food aversions, food allergies, celiac disease, cancer even. So with autoimmune diseases, we're not talking about inability to fight off bacteria and viruses, but more of the body turning on itself, attacking its own cells. So just like we do with every sort of health condition, we have to ask why. We have to ask what's the cause of it. And in order to really get to the bottom of an autoimmune disease, we have to understand the immune system better. So this slide is a little bit complicated maybe, but we're going to break it down. Basically, there are two systems that make up the immune system. The first one is innate natural immunity, and this one has multiple lines of defense before a pathogen can ever even get to the bloodstream. So you encounter a pathogen, your first line of defense is your skin, your mucous membrane, so your nose, your throat. Then you also have your natural gut flora. If the pathogen is able to get past that, it goes to the second line of defense, which would be the innate immune cells, the cells that are designed to attack the pathogens. Then there's also the inflammatory process. There's antimicrobial substances that already exist inside your body. If a pathogen is able to get through all of those things, then it goes to the adaptive immune system, and that kicks in. Now, it's important to know that the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system, they're designed to communicate with each other. They go back and forth, and together they create a strong, organized response. So that's what we want. We want lifelong immunity, and in order to get lifelong immunity, it has to go through all of these barriers that strengthens the immune system, and these two systems have to work together. Now, this is really important to understand when it comes to the idea of vaccination as a type of immune therapy versus natural exposure to an antigen or a pathogen. Because with the natural immune system, natural exposure, it hits all of these barriers. The immune system is strengthened before the pathogen ever gets to the bloodstream and can act on the different cells in the body. When we use a vaccine, we skip the innate immune system completely. We go right to the adaptive immune system. It goes right into the bloodstream, and we expect that to give us lifelong immunity when we haven't strengthened the immune system at all. So now, this isn't a workshop on vaccines, but I think it's important to understand, especially with all of the rise of autoimmune diseases in kids and the increase in number of vaccinations that are recommended for kids. I don't think there's any coincidence there, because anytime you try to trick the body into health, it backfires every single time.
What is it, 69 doses by the time they're 19 years old? Is that right, Chrissy?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you count the ones that the mother would receive during pregnancy, I think it's up to 72.
Wow, yeah. So what she said is if you count the ones that the mother receives during pregnancy, it's up to 72. And we were told in school that pregnant women should never be vaccinated for anything. And yet here we are. And what's really interesting is that now with bioaccumulation, we pass that down from generation to generation. And we're talking about toxicity right now. And so bioaccumulation, we know there's bioaccumulation when we talk about animal species. So biologists will talk about bioaccumulation. And if you remember the Great Lakes when they were extremely toxic, that was Lake Michigan as an example. They were really concerned because the fish, and really the fish would wash up onto the shore. They were extremely toxic. The birds would eat the fish, and the birds would then have very brittle eggs that wouldn't last. Sometimes they would have mutations with their offspring. And no biologist in the right mind would go to the Great Lakes and say, you know what we need? What we need to do is dump more chemicals into the water to fix this. You know what we need to do is set up tiny fish hospitals and treat them and send them right back into the water, right?
Yeah.
But they would never do that. No biologist, but yet we separate the animal species so much from the human species. And if we were to treat the humans like we do our animals, sometimes I think that we'd actually be healthier.
Yeah.
And if we looked at it from maybe a perspective of what's the actual cause of the problem and explore the problem instead of maybe profiting off of the sickness is what we have right now in a current model of symptom management care is what I would call that, symptom management or disease management. And this is the biggest problem right now is that when you walk into a medical setting with a problem and you have some type of disease or sickness, unfortunately, it's the management of the disease or sickness over time. You don't have much hope of ever overcoming in that system. You just don't. You have not a whole lot. It's managing my diabetes, managing my heart disease. It even says in the American Heart Association, expect to be treating high blood pressure for the rest of your life. And what does that mean? Expect to be on that medication for the rest of your life. When we talk about kids, hey, sick kids turn into sick adults. Healthy kids turn into healthy adults, or at least have a better chance. Can we control our kids after they're a certain age? No, but we can instill within them principles from an early age so that they'll make better informed decisions. And hopefully if they veer off, they come back and don't get too far out there. But it's our job to create that environment, and it starts with the parents. So I want to say this, because I have patients all the time that'll tell me, I can't get my kids to eat that food. Well, you don't eat that food. What are you talking about? Like my kids would never go outside and exercise. And it's like very clear, like, and you know how I am. So I'll just say it, like, come on. Come on. When's the last time you worked out consistently over time? And one of the things that people say, but I eat really well. I eat clean. And what's my response? What was breakfast? What was lunch today? I want to know what happened today. If I opened your fridge, would you be proud? So it's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Like, if right now your kids aren't living a certain way, well, the question is, you've got to be so far in front of them that you're kind of pulling So if you're either behind or next to them, no chance they're going to live better than you unless they're just, somebody very different. But in order for them to be successful, again, what is you're on an airline, the masks drop down, they say, what do you do first? You put on who? You put on yours first before you help your child.
Your oxygen mask.
Your oxygen mask.
Yes.
I have to clarify that now, don't I? Yeah, when the masks drop down, hey, guess what? We have free masks for you everywhere now since they're mandated and required. And if you don't wear it, you'll get moved to the back of the airplane, like I did. Yep.
Yes. Point is, kids are great imitators, so give them something great to imitate.
That's good. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
And really stop interfering. Here's a good model of health for you. Again, we call this the 5 essentials or max living model of health. It's that your body doesn't need help, it just needs no interference. You think about how brilliant your body is, how amazing your kids' bodies are. I've got a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, and when Samuel, my 3-year-old, when he falls and scrapes his knee, it heals overnight. It's incredible. He was the other night, he was in the middle of the night trying to get in our bed, and he was sneaking down. We've got a new house, and so new steps, and so he ran smack into the furniture, like big time, like immediate bruise. You know when it immediately bruises, like this is gonna be bad. By the next morning, that was already down to red. By now, it's completely gone. It's only been like a handful of days at this point. And so kids heal fast, but when a baby's born, we say it's the miracle of life. Well, that miracle didn't leave us. The miracle's still there. And so your lungs constantly rejuvenating itself, constantly replacing itself, right? Your skin cells, every year you get a whole new set of skin cells. Every 120 days, your red blood cells replace themselves. Every 6 months, your stomach and digestive lining replaces itself. So if you think about how brilliant the body is, I like to picture it like this. I picture like a fountain where water is constantly replacing itself, right? Not a sculpture as much, because a sculpture, it breaks down, it chips, you can replace the parts. With a fountain, it's constantly regenerating itself, constantly replacing itself, and that's how our bodies are. And if you read Sayer G's book, Regenerate, I think it was a really good synopsis of how the body, does replace itself and regenerate itself. And even from his perspective, which is different from mine, from an evolutionary perspective, he just paints this picture of like, yes, it's undeniable that the body is self-healing, self-regulating, and it works best when we stop trying to interfere and let's call it play God. And that's what's really happened with, unfortunately, our model of health today is with the Flexner Report of 1910, what happened is the Rockefellers funded Flexner Report. The Flexner Report said anything that recognizes a deity or anything that recognizes a higher being and tries to incorporate that within medicine, it's deemed anti-scientific and anti-medicine, and we're going to close down those schools. They can't operate, they can't function, and we're only going to support the ones that don't recognize that. You can't separate mind from the body. You can't separate the spirit from the body. You can't separate beliefs from the body. Just read the book, Mind Over Medicine. There's so many examples of how the mind, how our thoughts, our belief systems play a direct role in our body's ability to heal. You can't separate the two. But that was the downturn of medicine, and that's why you see in medicine, the allopathic view is to try to manipulate or trick the body into doing what you think it should do at the right time, at the time that you think it should happen. Well, the greatest doctor in the world is not at Johns Hopkins, not at the Mayo Clinic. The greatest doctor in the world is actually living right inside of you. Needs no help, just no interference. That's a philosophy. It's a way of living. And again, challenge it. I'd love for you to challenge that one. Yep.
So we're saying that health starts in the womb. A healthy body, a healthy nervous system is built from even before birth. I would argue before conception, but that's probably another talk for another time. So what mom does to take care of her health directly impacts baby. And a lot of people already understand that. That's why so many women take prenatal vitamins. That's why they go to multiple checkups throughout pregnancy, because people know this. People are seeking good health so that they can pass it on to their children. We just have to get a better idea of how to go about doing that. So one of the things that we like to talk about here is chiropractic for pregnancy. And it makes sense when you look at it at face value that chiropractic, if it's for neck pain and back pain, would be beneficial during pregnancy, because that sort of thing happens during pregnancy. Neck pain, back pain, sciatica, all of that. So we can talk about it from a biomechanical aspect in that there are a lot of changes happening in the body physically. Abdomen is growing, so that will naturally put stress on the joints and discs. So chiropractic is great for that. But we can also look at it from a neurological perspective in that mom is doing arguably the most athletic thing that she will ever do in her life in growing and carrying a baby and then delivering it. So she needs to make sure that her nervous system is functioning well, because her nervous system is not only running her body, it's also running her baby's body. So throughout the process of development and growth of the baby, mom's nervous system has to be removed of any interference that could potentially harm baby. Same, you can turn it around and say that the healthier mom's nervous system is, the healthier baby's going to be as well. So chiropractic care for pregnancy is good for mom and for baby. Once again, from a biomechanical perspective, one of the things that I love about chiropractic care during pregnancy is that we also address ligaments, and the ligaments that specifically attach to the uterus. Those ligaments attach to the pelvis, they attach to the sacrum. So if there's misalignment in the pelvis and sacrum, then that causes tension and torsion on the ligaments, which pull on the uterus. Now, when the uterus is torqued and misshapen, that creates a really tight space for baby. Baby can't get comfortable and move into proper positioning. So that might look like discomfort for mom throughout pregnancy, but especially toward the end, when she's getting closer to labor, that would show up in baby's inability to drop in the pelvis, to engage in proper positioning for birth, and could result in a more difficult labor and delivery for mom, which might lead to intervention, unwanted intervention, like C-section, or using Pitocin to induce more contractions. That would cause damage in not only the birth experience for mom, but physically for mom and potentially even for baby, because we know that 87% of kids actually have birth trauma from a difficult birth and labor. And that has an impact on baby as well, because when they're starting off life with that damage to their nervous system, damage to their cranial bones, to their neck, that's going to cause issues later on. So one of the things that we do here when we take care of pregnant moms is actually a technique called Webster technique. That's a specific check for the sacrum and the pelvis to make sure that the sacrum is in alignment, not causing any torsion on the uterus, and it really allows baby to have more room and allows mom to carry better and have a safer delivery.
You just see the difference between those who are getting adjusted during pregnancy
so much,
and those who are not. It's very clear. Now, is it perfect every time? No, it's not perfect every time. The body's perfect every time, but things happen. We know things happen. However, there's such a difference, and that's why many of our moms are like, I wish I would have discovered this for my first one.
Yeah.
Right? I wish I would have discovered this for my last labor or my last pregnancy, because this was so much different, so much easier during pregnancy. Again, not everyone is the same on that. However, you see the difference, and it's very clear the difference. And then with the birth trauma, you said 87% of kids go through a traumatic birth, and that's forceps, or if that doesn't work, it's the vacuum extraction. If you really think about that, though, they pull the baby out by their head and really crank on the head, and yet when you hold a baby, what are you so careful with?
Yeah, supporting its head.
But birth is the one time in life we rip and grip on a baby's head, and no one ever checks the spine. The spine's either important or it's not important. You can't say, well, it's not important. Well, when does it become important? When you have got full-blown scoliosis? When you've got a spondylolisthesis? Is that when it's important? We've got disc bulges. Does it become important then? Again, the question is, do we wait for the disease diagnosis and the wheels to fall off for something to be important? No, it's important well before that. But the difference is, do we catch it at dysfunction, or do we catch it in full-blown disease? Do we wait for the disease to show up, or do we catch it in dysfunction? Because what do you think is cheaper, what do you think is easier, is disease or dysfunction? It's going to be much easier to catch it at dysfunction. It's so much easier to correct a child's spine than it is in adults. But where's the vast majority? I'm not picking on the medical model. I've got medical people in my family. I understand that. And again, they're good people. They're trying to do the right thing. But there's a model that really only supports the detection, the treatment, the racing for the cure of disease. And it's all about disease management and not necessarily catching it before the disease actually happens. And so when it comes to your family, you've got a choice in the matter. You can choose how you choose to care for your kids and care for yourself too.
Yeah, so given that birth can be so traumatic for kids, when's the ideal time to get kids checked?
Birth.
Yeah, exactly. So when things aren't checked, it can show up as symptoms. It might not always, but it can show up as symptoms. And some warning signs that we see in babies commonly are things like inability to latch. That would be usually correlated to misalignment and subluxation in the cervical spine. If they're favoring one side or the other, that's the one that I probably see most common. If a baby likes to feed on one breast and not the other one, if they have reflux or constipation and digestive problems, sleeping issues, these things are direct signs that there's issues in the baby's nervous system.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is that many of the kids that we check, it's interesting. They don't necessarily get checked because of symptoms, do they?
No.
Many times it's the mom just made the decision, or the dad made the decision to check the child. What's very interesting is you and I both have x-rays of children whose spines, it's almost like you have a crystal 8-ball, that if they were to continue down that same road, we already have mom or dad's x-rays, and you can already see the patterns developing that mom or dad has. And one example, she's 35 years old, the mom is, an 11-year-old is her daughter, no symptoms whatsoever. The mom has massive scoliosis, has sciatica to the point where she's 2 months away from surgery, and she decides to start care. And before she even does, she said, hey, I want my kids to be checked. We check the 11-year-old, take x-rays, no symptoms whatsoever yet. But what does she have? She has a massive scoliosis already developing. And yet here she is. She would have never had her spine or nervous system checked if mom didn't make that decision to get them checked. And so kids, don't wait for symptoms to show up. Again, that would be more of an allopathic view of health, to wait for things to show up and then do something about it, reactive. We don't want to react when it comes to our health. We want to be proactive.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And there's a lot of good things about, there's some common sense things that I think we still should talk about, like breastfeeding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Everyone, even in the medical community, they'll say, hey, breast is best. However, it's not just a good idea, it's essential. It's essential to the immune system. There was a big push several years ago to put kids on formula. I don't think they do that as much anymore in a hospital setting, but there was a big push saying that, hey, the formula is just as good as mother's milk. Why is that not the case?
It's not the case because formula is so highly toxic. It causes inflammatory processes in a baby. And really, breast milk is best because there is no other substance that you can give your child that is directly formulated for them. Like, it's made exactly for their body and their needs.
At that given time, too.
At that given time, yeah. I've seen studies and pictures of breast milk that was pumped like a week before a child got sick. And then a mom will pump the week that a child is sick, and the two milk from the same mother for the same child are completely different colors because they're made up of different antibodies and different ratios that baby needs at that exact time. The body is so smart. Well,
just the intelligence within the body that there's receptors on a mother's breast that actually is there to detect what pathogens and what bacteria exists on a child's mouth and what the child is within the internal, within the tongue. And it produces the milk based off of that with an immune response for that individual child for that individual time.
Yeah.
And we think that we can trick the body into health. I mean, it's a fool's game.
Or create a formula that would do the same thing.
Yeah, well, and you can see the difference between a breastfed baby versus a formula-fed baby.
Oh, yeah.
A formula-fed baby oftentimes is inflamed. And again, no judgment if you feed, it's no judgment, but you can see the difference. I mean, if you feed a child natural milk from its mother versus, let's say, high fructose corn syrup and a lot of corn starch and a formula fed that is many times made by one of the vaccine manufacturers anyway, I mean, you're going to see a difference in that child's outcome. So if, let's say, hey, you struggled to breastfeed, well, there's some other formulas that you can make at home, or you can, there's people all over that have extra that you can find these people and you can coordinate with these people, and again, you can get supply from somebody else.
Yeah. So kind of the theme of all of this is that these are best practices, and oftentimes best practices are not the easiest practices. So this is something that you really have to set your mind to. If you want what's best for your child, if you want to grow them to be the healthiest they possibly can, it's going to take some work. But get with other people who are like-minded, get a support team around you. This is why it's so important and why we invite you to plug into the Max Living community, because we're going to support you in the decisions that you're making and really help you figure out what's best for your kid and your family.
Yeah, in Indy, we've got a great Max Moms group that Tracy's a part of, my wife's a part of, Chrissy, you're a part of. There's a great Max Moms group here. All you have to do is just reach out to us. It's an easy group just to get plugged into. And again, they do live meetings and then webinars and everything else. And there's a Facebook back-end page and whatnot. But the biggest thing is you got to fight for this. When it comes to breastfeeding, what I've been told is, and what I've seen with patients, is you got to fight for it. You got to hire somebody. If you can't get the child to latch, don't just give up and say it's not for me. No, fight for it. Get the la leche or get the doula. Have somebody who's an expert in this area help you fight for this. When it comes to your children and being picky eaters, you got to fight for it. Again, you got to lead by example, but they're not going to starve. And if you're changing out from, let's say, one thing to another with kiddos, they're not necessarily going to love it at first, but again, fight for it over time and it becomes easier and easier, but the initial part is a little bit of a battle.
So with introducing food, when you're introducing different foods into baby's diet, definitely keep with breast milk and then slowly introduce foods. The best thing to do, rather than buying those jarred, canned ones that who knows even what kind of chemicals are in there, start with making it at home. Just puree some vegetables and fruits and introduce them one at a time, and baby will let you know when they're hungry, and you can trust that. Their body is smart too.
Yep. What about screen time?
Screen time.
Yeah, because it was said 18 months, but I would even extend that the first two years of life. Listen, again, you got to fight for this when it comes to kids. I know this one firsthand. You got to fight for that child when it comes to screen time. It's going to be easier to put them in front of a screen while you do work or whatever. You've had a long day. I get it, but their neurodevelopmental brain is so critical during that time, where you've got to fight for your kids to not be in front of a screen. And let's say they are in front of a screen, make sure you get them away from it and limit that time. But the first 2 years of life, really, hey, let's just say no screen time first 2 years of life, and that will be a battle, that'll be challenging, that'll be hard, but it's totally worth it when you see a kid who is well-connected, in tune, looking at you in the eyes, versus the one who's very fidgety and has difficulty concentrating and would be diagnosed with ADD or ADHD if you took him to a pediatrician. And so fight for those moments. It's those moments that really matter over time.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about exercise just for a minute, because I keep hearing this, that especially with COVID, the COVID world, and schools not being in session or their virtual learning. I saw a picture of somebody waving to their child while they go down to the basement for e-learning for that day.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's not what the other parents said. They said it was cute. But so if our children are, more sedentary now than ever, then we've got to be very intentional about the movement and incorporate this. The easiest thing to do is incorporate this as a family. Find a park, find a hill that you guys just run up and down while kicking a ball. It can be as simple as that. But getting out there and moving, if we are raising children to be at a desk or in a chair and more sedentary than not, on video games, on screens, and what is that doing to their spines? What is that doing to their nervous system? What is that ultimately doing to their body? We hear about the COVID-15, that people are gaining 15 pounds during COVID.
Quarantine 15?
Yeah, that's it, quarantine 15. And so people are gaining, so kids, what is that doing to kids? Do you think that kids, think about this, kids who already were struggling with, and moms and dads who are already struggling with feeding their children, now they're at home, they're getting school lunches, now they're at home. Do you think now they're eating kale? There's no chance.
No.
I mean, do you think that now all of a sudden they switch to cucumbers and carrots and hummus? And no, what are they eating? They're eating crap. They're eating crap. And so if that's the case, all right, so they're gaining weight. They are. And so they need to move. They need to move even more. And we need to just recognize that that there is that that damage that has been done, that will take some undoing, and being intentional about that over time. But get outside, move out in the sun. If your kids are at home and they're doing virtual learning right now, get them out in the sun right now. Especially if you're in the Midwest, it's actually not bad outside right now. Right now, if they enacted a draft, 1/4 of our children would be unfit for military duty. That's how bad it's gotten. 1/5 of our kids are obese. Again, I don't have to show you the stats. There's 25% of our children, when you test them, they have plaquing in their arteries already. And this is not something to mess around with. This is something that is, again, one of the essentials is movement. So oxygen and lean muscle that doesn't start as you get older and start to gain weight, and now it's a weight loss program, starts from from as early as possible. And again, if the kids see you doing it, they're most likely to do it.
Yeah.
Our kids, so at least Isaiah, he knows how to do a burpee. He goes out there and does squats with us. He does challenges. He runs up and down our hill outside just for fun because, again, it's like get out of the house, get off the screens, and go do something. Well, again, if kids are trained well, they'll know. Just go be active and have fun, and play is really activity when it comes to kiddos.
Yeah, that's great. So activity, exercise, nutrition. We'll talk about nutrition too. So some reasons why nutrition is important, not only for building a healthy body, but because in America, we've effectively destroyed our gut microbiome. Mm-hmm. Things like C-sections, that's so important. When kids are born vaginally, they go through the birth canal, and that's their first exposure to mom's good bacteria, the big probiotic gulp. Their first exposure, their first inoculation, and they use that probiotic gulp to develop the gut flora that they have. That's their first exposure.
First time I heard that, I was like, that's disgusting.
I know. It sounds pretty gross, but it's a real thing.
The kid ate the poop, right?
Yeah, so when kids are born via C-section, they miss that entire process. So they're already starting off life without that good gut flora. And then when you add in things like antibiotics, a lot of kids take antibiotics at a very early age for things like ear infections or even just after birth. A lot of kids are born in a hospital and then they're just given IV antibiotics.
And the vast majority of ear infections are they bacterial or viral?
Viral.
Yeah, and so what do we do the vast majority of time? If a mom walks in with an ear infection, what does that child leave with? A script to go get an antibiotic. Tell me how that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't at all. Then with the next phase, as they're growing up, we start to eat processed foods, the standard American diet that causes inflammation in the body and destroys the gut microbiome further. So this is why we need to talk about nutrition as a way of replenishing that and helping with the digestive system, because we know that the digestive system is directly correlated, directly connected to the immune system. So,
and our nutrition speaks to our DNA. So there's a whole field of study about exosomes. And how exosomes are a part of the food that in its whole form actually speaks to our DNA. And they use berries as an example. So berries, when grown in a certain environment, it develops certain resilience, like in the heat, it develops that resilience. And then when we ingest it, we also get some of the benefits of the resilience of that individual berry. We know that fruits, vegetables, that they have an interconnected system of communicating with each other on some level. If there's disease in one root system, that they, especially within trees and fruit that grows from trees, they communicate with each other to develop certain species of resistance to whatever bacteria that is. And then when we eat that in its whole form, we develop some of the same resistance that speaks to our DNA. It's incredible. And so there's two concepts here when it comes to food. It's food by God or food by man.
Exactly.
You know, do you think food by man that was manufactured in a chemical lab or a chemistry lab, or if it was an industrial made, is it going to have exosomes that speak to our DNA? Probably not. What it's going to be made out of is probably whatever is the quickest, easiest, and probably the cheapest and readily available. And so, you know, some things to really avoid when it comes to nutrition for our kids are things that have been manipulated, the things that have been chemically processed. And so more life-giving food, life within our body, the vibrancy of food. And I'm not talking about just the color of the food. I'm talking about life-giving food. And you can see what would be life-giving. Think about white flour. Not very vibrant.
No, it's not vibrant at all.
Versus, let's just say, an apple as an example. And so just, you know, again, one of the big things, though, is, hey, if a food has been chemically altered and manipulated or genetically modified, grown faster, again, that might be an argument to feed the world, which I'd also argue, I'd argue that point too. But it's never been an argument that this is the most nutritious, this is the most healthy thing for an individual child. It's all about the greater good. It's all about the greater society, not ever about the individual child. So an individual child, would a genetic modification of an individual food be actually good for that child? No one argues that that would be. And yet, what do we have? We have the labeling of genetic modification of foods. It came on in California that they want it to be labeled, and yet what do they say? Nope, we don't have to label these foods. That was a lobby that unfortunately that won that day, and us as consumers, we need to fight for it. And so organic, certified organic, that the USDA mark, that's something that you can almost trust. So there's some limitations to it, but it's something that is regulated. When it comes to fruit, when it comes to vegetables, if the PLU number starts with a 9, so a 9, that is organically grown. If it starts with a 4, it wasn't organically grown. So a couple quick tips for when you're buying groceries.
Yeah. So we all know what foods are healthy, what foods are not. We don't need to go through the laundry list. But I think the big question that parents have is, I know what's healthy. How do I get my kids to eat it?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So here are a couple of tips that we have going through ages on how to take care of your picky eaters in your house.
Yeah, so what she said about young, like babies, infants, so adding the breast milk into any food is gonna be helpful. From the ages of toddler, I'd say smaller portion vegetables are gonna be a great option there. But as they grow older, and you'll see this on the screen, if Kevin, you want to put this part on the screen, kids age 4 to 8. Find a couple of vegetables that they're going to eat, rotate them into breakfast, rotate them out, but then teach them the why behind it. So the closer and older that they get, that closer to 6, 7, 8 years old, let them make some decisions on their own, and also let them fall and fail forward. What does that mean? Let them make a bad decision and watch some of the consequences, because they have to sometimes feel that consequence. Just as an example. I hate to keep using personal examples, but I'm a parent, and this is about parenting. So one of my kids, Isaiah, if he's having like sniffy nose, or running nose, he's got the sniffles, or he's not feeling all that well, he'll think back. He's 8 years old. He'll think back. He's like, you know what? I did go to Chick-fil-A. I did have, Grandma took me to Chick-fil-A. I'll just throw Grandma right under the bus. It's a theoretical Grandma right now. It's not you, Mom. I went to Chick-fil-A, and that's probably what it was. And so he's connecting the dots between sickness and what he's done. So there's a level of responsibility there. And we can teach our children, I think more important than anything is to teach some level of responsibility, that there's a direct correlation with our choices and outcomes. And when it comes to our food, there's a direct correlation with choices and outcomes. And it's not like, you eat a it's not like you eat a McDonald's chicken nugget and you fall over dead, right? So that's the thing. It's like there's not immediate consequences for these things, but the healthier you are, the more likely you are to be sick when exposed to something or to have symptoms. Someone who's exposed to certain fragrances and they get an immediate headache, some people say, well, they're just so sensitive, they've got chemical sensitivity. Well, no, that's actually brilliant. That's amazing. That's so good that they have a chemical sensitivity, because their body reacts so quickly and so well to environmental toxins. Somebody who can walk into a room and they can say, like, I can be around anything, or I've got the stomach of a goat. Warning sign.
A goat?
Yeah, they say that. You've never heard that before?
No, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I can eat anything, right? I can eat 10 and I'd be fine. You've never heard this. You need to go around males more often, I think, because they say it all the time.
Okay.
And so, warning sign. If you have a stomach like a goat, that's a bad thing. That's a big problem there. So the more sensitive that someone is and can tell when they've been exposed to something, really it's a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
So ages 9 to 13, you got a meal plan, you got to prep, you got to help them as they're going to school. Again, they're not with you. If they're going to school, they're not with you during that time. And so really, if they don't know these principles, or they don't really just get these principles, they're going to sub out their healthy food for something else anyway. So again, teaching them early the why behind it, then they can teach other kids. And that becomes the fun thing, is that then the kids all of a sudden have their circle of influence that they're telling, hey, no, this is why I eat these things. That's why I wouldn't eat that. That's actually not good. And what you'll start to see is now their circle of influence either starts to change, or they get a new circle of influence who are more like-minded. Mm-hmm. Either way, it's a win-win. So again, it's about the decisions that they make and teaching them. Again, what does it teach a man to fish, right? And so that whole concept of teaching them and educating them instead of just doing for them, I think it makes a big difference there. As they get older, again, you got to give them the freedom to choose what they're going to eat, because they're going to do that anyway. But again, hopefully we've instilled some good principles there that they come back at some point as they backslide. Because they probably will.
Certain level of responsibility in children for their own health is going to create a level of responsibility when they're adults. So it's really setting them up for the best future.
Yeah, and again, picky eaters, we've kind of addressed picky eaters and what to do about that. But here's the reality, is that there's a lot of our kids who, they just struggle. And whether it's to eat the right foods or they are making changes later on in life, and it's just like it's very difficult for them to change. And one of the questions we always get is, okay, so my kids, they don't eat perfect, we are not perfect. What are some of the things that I can do supplementary that can kind of help my child and help to get back on track? And we get the most questions about supplements because of even the most recent studies that have come out that showed like some of the most common supplements that are over the counter. It's very well known they're not regulated by the FDA. There's been some that have been just completely manipulated, and what was said on the bottle is not in the bottle, and it's a bunch of fillers, and really some of them are toxic. One of the biggest named, and I'm not going to say the name, I don't want to be sued, but one of the biggest ones that is given to kids, they had such amounts of calcium in them that when a child would eat them and you'd x-ray that child, you'd still see the calcium supplement kind of still being digested in their gut, and again, in its whole form, and that's in their colon at this point, so it means it wasn't actually absorbed, so it's just basically going right through their digestive tract. And people will say, like, well, some of the best supplements are the most expensive. Well, the best supplement is going to be the one that works. And so you got to trust the brand, you got to know where the manufacturing is coming from, trust the source, and ultimately know how everything, and again, you're not always going to know how everything is handled from start to finish, and that's why you need a good, trusted source that can help you make these decisions. When I need help with like lawn care, just as an example, I don't try to do all that myself. I go to the people who are the experts. When I need help with my taxes, I'm not going to try to figure out all the tax codes. I go to that expert who's going to help me with that and help navigate that. So, that's what we're here for, is to help navigate that. Some of the basic recommendations when it comes to just supplementation for, I think, in general for kids, a couple things that are really good for kids on a regular basis. Vitamin D3 is incredible. Kids need to have vitamin D3. We get it from the sun. It's synthesized in the liver with skin and eye contact with the sun, and yet we don't get enough of the sun. Our kids are chronically deficient, and adults chronically deficient in vitamin D3. So vitamin D3 is so important. Now, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So A, D, E, and K are all fat-soluble. And so really the child needs to be eating good, healthy fats along with it. So avocado, fish, raw seeds, nuts, things like that. That's why you'll see the Max Living vitamin D3 comes with an omega along with it. So it's a liquid form. It's an omega-3 supplementation along with the vitamin D3. And one of the biggest reasons, yes, because of the fat-soluble vitamin, but also our kids need good, healthy fats. Our brain is made up of fat. Our nervous system is coated in fat. Our hormones are required to have good, healthy fat, many times as transporters. And so a healthy fat with a D3 is a good one on a regular basis. The other one is just a good children's multivitamin, not one that's going to get stuck in the colon, and the one that you'll see on an x-ray, but one that's made from a whole food supplement or whole food nutrition. And so those are two that are good on a regular basis. A couple of the other ones that I want to point out, because it's ones that I recommend on a regular to parents. One is a kid's detox. So if you know your child has been exposed to a certain level of toxicity, maybe that is the fact that Ritalin, the increase of Ritalin has gone up 750% in the last 15 years. And so we know medications is the number one source of toxicity within children. We've covered the mercury exposure from some of the most common childhood vaccinations. Aluminum, we know, is a big one. We live in the aluminum era, where when we test people, we commonly see mercury and aluminum toxicity. It's a big one. And especially those in the healthcare field seem to have a higher exposure to that, just because they likely get the flu shot every year. And again, mercury preservative, thimerosal, and aluminum within that. And again, because we live in the aluminum world, in the era of aluminum, it's prevalent. So again, that's why a light detox for a child is just a good starting place. And also a probiotic, a kid's probiotic. What you said about the antibiotics and how prevalent they are, that is wiping out our gut flora. 70 to 80% of our immune system lives in our gut. So if we are wiping out our gut flora, we have to be intentional about replacing that, rejuvenating that. Yes, getting in good healthy probiotic-rich foods, but being very intentional about loading up. So if your child, because of an ear infection or because of whatever, has had an antibiotic, you have to be intentional about getting their gut flora reestablished, and sometimes that takes months. It can take years, but again, good healthy probiotic is sometimes something that's very necessary.
Yeah, and an important thing with probiotics, just for a second, is diversity. You want diversity in the flora that is provided in the probiotic, and the MaxKids or Max Living probiotics does a really good job of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, Talisha, you can post a link on that because people always ask how to get that. You can actually just get that online. You don't have to be in our individual clinic to do that. You just get on our store on IndyFamilyChiro.com or MaxLivingIndy.com and select a store from there, and you can find it there. It's as easy as that. If you are in-house, always we've got discounts for any supplementation. I believe it's 10% off anything that's in-house today. So we know, like, lunch, I think sometimes it's better, like, what's not for lunch.
Yeah.
What should we not be doing for lunch when it comes to kids and packing lunches?
Yeah. So some of the things to not pack in your kids' lunch are actually the most common things that we pack in our kids' lunches. Things like Lunchables. I remember eating Lunchables all the time when I was younger. They were the best. But
Have you ever looked at the ingredients?
Oh
of
my
Lunchables?
goodness, that's exactly what I was about to say. I never turned it over and looked over at the back of it. Granted, as a child, I didn't know, to look at it, or care, that's true. But to look at it now, the meats have nitrates in them, which are carcinogenic. Even just the processing and the artificial preservatives in there, it's terrible. So no Lunchables. Bags of chips. Often chips are cooked in rancid oils, so that makes them carcinogenic as well. Desserts, we want to avoid sugar. Sugar destroys the gut microbiome. Sugar causes inflammation in the body. Avoid sugar. And fruit drinks. We've talked about sugary, high fructose corn syrup in drinks before. Definitely avoid putting fruit drinks. So what are some alternatives, though? Because we can't just say no to all these things. We have to give replacements. Yeah.
And so what to pack, protein option. If it's going to be a protein option, let's say grass-fed beef, start to finish. If it's going to be chicken, then it's got to be it's got to be raised appropriately. You want it to be, free-range chicken. When it comes to your eggs, as an example, we don't want to just say cage-free. So if pretend you're a chicken right now, do you want to just be cage-free or do you want to be free-range? So that's how I always delineate that. So you want to be free-range. You want to make sure that it is organic, ideally. And so some of these things, when it comes to protein options, sometimes we emphasize protein, really animal protein, more than we should. Animal protein is a good option. We have enzymes in our mouth that require protein. And so I would, my argument would be, yes, we need protein, but not nearly in the amount that we've said so over time. And so good healthy fats, it's really the missing link in our diet in general. So good healthy fats, loading up on those good healthy fats, making sure that the raw seeds, raw nuts, even raw cheeses, that's going to be a great option. Making sure that even introducing avocado to children, it's amazing. It's a brain food. Boiled eggs can go a long way. Even put ketchup on boiled eggs. Some kids like ketchup on boiled eggs. You got to just know your children, right?
Ketchup with no high fructose corn syrup in it.
Well, that's the problem with ketchup in general. Yeah, you got to get the natural kind. And so, and then an easy option is you don't need to throw in milk in there. Water, you can sweeten it with stevia. Put lemon in there if you really need to. But our kids should not grow up thinking that all drinks should be sweet. The vast majority of the calories and sugar is actually coming from drinks rather than the food, and yet we neglect that. And again, it starts with you, mom and dad. Starbucks Frappuccino has the equivalent of a 24-ounce Coke of sugar in it. And so, so when it comes to our decisions, again, if we want our children to drink water, then hey, let's start with mom and dad.
Yeah. And you can even make it fun, like buy them a fun water bottle to put water in and then send it to school with them. That makes up for the colorful drinks.
That's right. And you can actually get a non-toxic food dye if you really need to, at first. You can really get that. And don't let them fill up at the water fountain. You can get water bottles that can filter out some of the toxins. But we just tested our water, and with patients, again, with toxicity screening, you see this so often, is that our water, many times lead, arsenic, sometimes even aluminum, cadmium, and it's just unfortunate some of the things that end up in drinking water. Birth control ends up in drinking water, as it's either urinated out or it's, some people will just dump the bottles in the waste system. And so the other one, antidepressants in our water. It's not like the pharma has put it there yet, but but it ends up in our, because why? Because the average American now fills 12 prescriptions every single year. So it ends up into the water, whether it passes through directly or it ends up getting dumped out. And so having a good filtration system is important. Send them a couple bottles of water instead of just one, so that they drink all of it and they don't fill up at the drinking fountain.
Yeah, that's good. So yeah, we had some couple shopping tips up there. Can peruse. But so we can talk about nutrition, we can talk about toxicity, we can talk about all of that all day long. But if you are cleaning up your lifestyle and, like we said, doing some of the essentials but not all of them, then you're really not going to set yourself up for success, because everything comes back to how well your body is able to adapt. And the way your body adapts to the environment, to the things that you're putting in your body and taking care of it, is through your nervous system. So your nervous system is made of your brain and your spinal cord. Your spine runs through the center of your body and it controls everything that happens in your body. So if there's issues, if there's damage with your nervous system, it's going to cause issues in other parts of your body as well.
Yeah, just think about, you've heard fight or flight or rest, digest, rebuild, rejuvenate, and repair. It's all part of your nervous system. So if the nervous system is imbalanced, what happens is the body is set up for stress, and when you have stress within the body, whether it's physical, emotional, whether it's chemical, what that's going to do is that's going to cause a breeding ground for sickness, for problems. And when people think about the spine, yes, the spine protects it, and yes, your spine holds you upright. And people think about, when they think about chiropractic's role in that, they think about neck pain, back pain, headaches. Again, that's really more of an allopathic view, waiting until you have big problems and then trying to take care of it. And really what we want to do is, on the front end, make sure that, just like dentistry, as an example, we don't go when our teeth hurt. Hopefully not, right? Yeah. We take care of our teeth. We brush our teeth. We floss our teeth. Yeah, how many people, knowing all the different stresses that they've been under over the course of time, have a good program or a good understanding of good spinal hygiene, good spinal biomechanics, understanding their specific alignment, understanding where the spine is shifted or causing problems? Because if you take a spine and you shift it out of its normal position, we've got Barry over here.
Barry.
And we're going to use Barry because he's got a spine. And if you can hear this, I'll put it right up to the mic. Ready? He's got a spine in there, so you can hear it. So Barry, he's got, unfortunately, one vertebra instead of 24. And so, our spine's got to be in good position. So straight from the front, you've got to have these three curves from the side. So this is Barry with a nice curve in his neck. We should have a nice curve in our neck. What happens, though, because of, let's say, our desks, and let's say our technology, and sitting, and now iPads, and now game systems, and now virtual learning, and now what do you have with mask posture? Have you seen mask posture, where everybody's kind of walking around like this, and literally their head is forward because of what? Because they don't want to breathe in with their glasses and fog up their glasses, and they're trying to see over them, so their head is down. And so what's happening is, now you have that child who's had birth trauma, so they pull in their head, or you have that child who's gone through sports and one-sided activities and throwing balls and twisting, and yet they go throughout life, and yet who's checking the function of their nervous system? Who's checking their spinal alignment? What do we find? We find it when it's scoliotic and it's bent over doing the Adams test, and we say, well, you've got scoliosis, and where do they go from there? They go, that is a screening tool for orthopedic surgeons. Yeah. That's what that is. And they go in, they say, you've got a massive scoliosis, here are your options. You can either watch and wait, which we know how that works, or what we can do is we can brace it 23 hours a day, you take it off the shower, or what we can do is go ahead and do the surgery. It's either now or later. Which one do you want to do? And many times the mom has that, they have to weigh the options. And listen, it may not be a massive scoliosis, but if we know that scoliosis takes 14 to 20 years off of one's life, and that's just quantity of life, not even quality of life, Well, then what does a curve that's causing pressure on nerves that go into the colon or go into the leg, what is that doing over time? And when do we want to know that's there, and when should we check that and correct that if it's a problem? You want to get that as early as possible. It's so much easier, is it not, to check and adjust a child's spine than it is an adult.
Absolutely.
So much easier to correct it. And then you have, as an adult, 10 years of a desk job, or as they get older, 20 years of degeneration that's built up there. You got to remember this. Healthy kids, healthy adults, sick kids, sick adults. Well, a healthy spine is a healthy adult spine, but one that's misaligned does degenerate. And yet, what do? We diagnose people with degenerative disc disease. We call it a disease. It's not actually a disease. Even the medical doctors, they argue about this. It's not a disease. It's a normal process of uneven stress and pressure that causes that. It's just like alignment on your car. Your alignment on your car is off, tires, they ball unevenly, yes? The same thing happens in the spine. If Barry's walking around with hips that are jacked up like this, what's going to happen to Barry's spine? Well, he's not going to just walk over leaning. He's going to bend this way. And what happens, he's going to wear out his L5, his S1. What's he going to do? His sacrum is going to be imbalanced. Yes, Barry might end up with sciatica, but many times we take a picture of somebody with full-blown sciatica, and what do we already find? Phase 2 degeneration. There's only 3 phases. And so it's phase 2 degeneration, and now the question is, well, what do I do about that now? Well, you can get adjusted, you get the pressure off the nerves, you can feel better, you can function better, but is that ever going to look like that person's 18 again? Probably not.
No.
And so when do we want to catch this? We want to catch this well before it turns into sickness and disease and problems, so Barry can live his full life to his optimal potential.
Yes, good job, Barry. So we talked about birth trauma as something that would cause misalignment in the spine with kids, but there are also other things, car seats, bumbo chairs that we put kids in before they're ever able to sit up. If they can't sit up, then their lumbar spine isn't able to bear that weight yet, and when we sit them up and force them to do that, that's going to cause misalignment in the spine, that's going to shift, cause issues later in life. Bouncing seats that we put. Bouncers. Yeah, the bouncer seats, that causes issues, putting stress on hips, femurs. Like I said, baby's not ready to bear that weight there yet. They'll let you know when they start to pull up on things themselves. That's when they're ready. But when we put them there prematurely, that's when we can cause issues for them later on in life. And then we already talked about cell phones and iPads and all of that. The posture that kids have with their heads here, that's causing damage early on in life. That's only going to get worse with time. So
we were taught in school that you develop your cervical curve. One is in utero, there's evidence of that. But then, again, that curve in the neck, so from the side you should have that healthy curve, is tummy time. And then looking up at adults. Right? Yeah. And so that's what helps to develop that curve. Yet, what are kids not doing as much of? They're looking down, not making eye contact, fidgeting, right? And so attention problems actually will have a negative consequence on spine and spinal alignment. And so teaching our kids to look at adults in their eyes is really important, actually.
Yeah. I get this question a lot from moms when they say, oh, but my baby doesn't like tummy time. They just can't do it. I can't make them do it. And a lot of times when a baby is laying on their tummy and they're fussy, it's because they feel like they're not interacting with you. They feel like they want the attention and they want you to be there engaged with them. So put them on their tummy and get down on the floor with them. Use toys to engage them and get them to pick their head up. A lot of the time that's what it takes. Or if a child is really uncomfortable on their tummy and they haven't been practicing that from very early on, first couple days of life, then you can do tummy time on your lap. Just have them laying on their tummy on your lap. It doesn't have to be on the floor. So those are just a couple of things that moms ask me a lot.
And sometimes their stomach is upset, right? Sometimes it's that they have what's called subluxation, where the spine's shifting out of its normal position, and they're just uncomfortable. And that's their way. That's their way of telling you that they're uncomfortable. And so don't neglect the fact that sometimes these are babies' warning signs, just trying to tell you and communicate, because they're not coming out and saying, I'm going to get sciatica if I stay in this position much longer. I'm going to get a headache, Mom. They're not saying that.
Yeah. So and that's why so many of the kids that come in here, when they're filling out their parents are filling out their paperwork for them, it's wellness, because you don't have that symptom to directly point to, but it's something that you can definitely prevent.
Yeah, and we just have, with patients come in, I just want to highlight this quick example of the differences, because I have up here is x-ray of two boys, and they are twins, 6 years old, so they're brothers. one of them is neuroatypical and one of them is neurotypical. So one has autism, one doesn't. And if you look at just the x-rays, you can see one of them has a stretched spinal cord. You look at the MRI version, which is the side-by-side. It's a cross-sectional view of the MRI. You can see that there's tension on the spinal cord, and that's the fight or flight response. When you have tension on your spinal cord, it's just like seeing a bear in the woods. A bear in the woods, you've got this mechanism to kick in to get you out of there quickly. Well, the same thing happens when we have tension constantly on our brain or brainstem. Our body goes through this response of fight or flight. It's subtle, but it's there. And if you look at the top bone in the neck, on the neuroatypical, so the child with autism, you can see that there's not a lot of spacing. There's not a lot of spacing there. There's not a lot of room there. You can see there's a lot of pressure directly at the brainstem level. And so the question really is not, did chicken or the egg, what caused what? It's not about that. It's about who does better. It's who's going to do better, that child with pressure and stretching of the spinal cord or that child without. That child who has damage to the nervous system, that child without. What you find, again, these are genetically identical twins, what you find is that as you get pressure off the nervous system, that child does better. And what's really, I think, more important here is that these are genetically identical twins. And so again, going back to the gene theory of disease, one has autism, one does not. One reacted very different. This is a vaccine-damaged child. And one reacted very different to the vaccine, one did not. Was it that there's pressure at the brainstem causing a fight or flight or a mitochondria issue that had already started and then just couldn't adapt well enough? Or was it something else? We don't know, but what we do know is that that pressure on the brainstem shouldn't be there, and it's important to try to get it off. And so what's cool is that kids, as we said, respond great.
Yeah.
Many times with babies, adjust with our pinkies, right? I've had many stories of adjusting children at birth. People ask, how old do you have to be? One of my children was 22 minutes old when he got adjusted. That was Samuel, my second born. And the other one was a day later because I was still in chiropractic school and had to have somebody else come adjust him. Yeah. And so the idea is to find the problem, correct the problem as early as possible so they grow healthy. You ever see a new tree that's being planted, you see those ropes around the new tree to make sure it grows up straight? How come it makes sense for trees but not for kids? It makes sense for kids to make sure they grow and develop normally because, again, it's not a tree, it's the spine, it protects your nervous system. And how important is your nervous system? The most important of any system you have in your body. So we've got a special. So one thing is we promised something at the very beginning. Yes,
the MaxKids recipe book. So text the number on the screen there, Healthy Family, and your email address, and we will email you the free digital MaxKids recipe book.
Yep, so that's 317-483-1756, and you can get that straight to your email. And listen, if you or your kids or someone you know or love has never had their spine and nervous system checked, this is the webinar special. Typically, it's $135 for the full exam, the consultation, any scans or x-rays we end up doing. All that would be covered under the $135. Our webinar special that we're doing is $54, and that is anyone in your household. Anyone that needs to hear this message, they just have to make the appointment directly. And the way that you do that is you just text in exam in your name to 317-483-1756. So that's the same number that we just gave out for the e-guide or the shopping guide, recipe guide.
Recipe book.
That's the one. It's exam to 317-483-1756. And a special announcement here. Again, this is for the exam and x-rays and everything that we end up doing. Again, if you had 97% blockage of an artery or nerve going to your heart, you'd want to know that, but how much more would you want to know that for your kids? How much more would you want to know that if that was your mom or your dad or someone in your family? So the reality is there's so many people around us that just don't know this information. It's our job to share it at this point. And again, because of censorship and shadow banning and all this stuff, it's really our job now to be more relational, to maybe get this information directly, tag that person in it. So who do you know who needs to hear this information? Hey, share this with them, tag them in it, whatever your means of communication is, but make sure this message gets out to people. And we do have a special announcement that's coming up October 5th, and this is the Max Living Masterclass. So it's a 6-week class where we go through all 5 essentials in depth. This is not just the basic information. This is in depth, and we go through everything from A to Z when it comes to nutrition. We go through supplementation. We go through higher level testing when it comes to general health. We're going to go through how to better take care of your spine and nervous system. So we're going to start that October 5th, and it's a 6-week class. So every week we'll have a class on that Tuesday, and this is really, the intentions are to help somebody go from, let's call it good, to great in their health, to go from exceptional. And really, there's this fearlessness that happens when you understand the body, when you understand the immune system. We're timing this along with the second wave that's, they're saying is going to come, to give you some confidence and certainty in how to have a strong immune system and how to do everything you can to not just protect yourself, but to navigate this maybe better than we did the first time when it comes to October and the second wave. We're also going to be talking about cancer and cancer prevention along with that. Strong immune system, cancer prevention, lifestyle things that you can be doing, and how to take care of your family. So I want to caveat on this one. It's a 6-week masterclass. We are only accepting a handful of seats in the clinic for this one, and we want to make sure that we honor loyalty. And so if you're watching this, you get first dibs. And so if you're here, you get first dibs on getting a seat at the 6-week masterclass. We want to make sure those who do this are committed. We want to make sure they're intentional. The question that we are getting is if I sign up for it, do I have to come to every single one? The answer is you try. And if you can't come to every single one, then make sure that you do your absolute best, maybe and fill your seat on that, so that you don't take a spot from somebody who could have really used our help. But if you commit to it, try to get to every single one. You're going to benefit on the back end by doing so. We'll work through childcare. There's potentially some childcare options that we're going to have for the people with kiddos. So we'll work through that one. I'm looking at Talisha on that. Yep.
Awesome.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for obviously thank you guys for coming, and thanks for watching. And again, if you know somebody who needs this information, it's easily accessible to just share this. So make sure you do your job. Subscribe so you get to the so you get notified when there's future videos. We're always trying to do a good job of posting videos and content constantly now, and so we're also on Instagram, Facebook, as long as we can until we get kicked off. But that's facebook.com. I'm on there. Facebook.com/AskDrWilson. Instagram AskDrWilson. On that, and follow along with the Indie Family Chiro and Max Living Indie community. Thanks, guys.